Ender's Game. Released in 2013, this film lacks greatly for much of the beginning, and you can tell straight away that this was written by a younger man who felt alone and challenged to take on the world. The first in a series of books, in my opinion, Ender's character takes a lot from Charlemagne, and even more from Alexander the Great, which is where I believe he gets his nickname from. Ender, Alexander, yeah. By contrast, Bonzo is clearly intended to be a combination of Napoleon and Mussolini, even though he's supposed to be from Spain. The main reason I think this is because of some of the casting they chose, choosing a shorter actor even though Napoleon was average height, and more so the fact that he keeps his squad constantly training for battle, which is like Bonaparte's innovation of the standing army. Napoleon's standing army meant that he could fight year-round, and by conscripting from siege territories as equal citizens in the French Empire, he could readily prevent rebellion. And like both Mussolini and Napoleon, Bonzo thinks that only he is right. But the author pulls no punches in giving him a nickname like that of a clown, even though they kind of pronounce it Bonzo. Again, in contrast, Ender is open to ideas from anyone equally and orders his own squad, the Dragons, to take bunks according to age, rather than rank. This is reflective, in my opinion, of Alexander's cosmopolitan ideal, represented in the multiple cities of Alexandria that he had others plan and build to be emblematic of the entire Hellenistic Greek world. After Ender gets in a fight with Bonzo, Bonzo can't take a strategic defeat twice, so he lunges at Ender, who pushes Bonzo back, slipping on the floor and hitting his head. Bonzo ends up a vegetable, but they show a machine operating to try and save him. Ender feels guilt for hurting Bonzo, and it's at this point, more than halfway through the film, that we're called back to a quote at the start of the film about knowing an enemy so well that you love them and that then you can defeat them. Again, this is a book written by a young man, so what are we supposed to think? Does knowing someone well really mean loving them, or simply identifying with what they want? And it's here that we get the praise for the philosophical elements of the story, which has been praised and won awards. But I don't think it holds up to scrutiny in contrast to Zen or even Torah, which essentially teach that there are no real enemies and that defeating another only buys into the false paradigm of polar opposites, protagonist versus antagonist. It ticks in Ender's head for a minute that the Colonel, played decently by Harrison Ford, could just as much be the enemy as anyone else. And while this could be seen as Ender seeing past the aforementioned paradigm, it's really just the fact that he feels alone and like he's turning into his older brother, Peter. I can say that so firmly because not only is this explored in a game that essentially takes the place of dreams for the purpose of the author, but he even says it when he's on a raft talking to his sister Valentine, whom we also see in the game or dream. They even bother to make the game's representations of Ender and Valentine look like CGI to let us know that it isn't a dream. I will say that for the external and CGI shots, they do an excellent job with the elements of spectacle to make it conceivable that they're in a space station or on an alien world. But it's nothing that we haven't seen before, just CGI. Part of the problem with pre-CGI effects like 2001: A Space Odyssey was that they were limited in what they could show you. So they put the viewer in the cockpit, or they showed an exterior shot with a fixed vantage point and a relatively fixed angle. But with the Lord of the Rings franchise, Peter Jackson and Wingnut Studios made a lot of exterior and outdoor shots in motion, like from a bird's eye view. This is fine the first few times you see it, but now every sci-fi or fantasy film uses this method, much like how a lot of sci-fi films try to use a shaky cam effect. We've been spoiled by handheld-style footage making things look like you're there in the first-person perspective, and the Jackson style with sweeping camera angles to give us a 3D view of the city, the station, or the ship. I think that there are older camera techniques that do a better job of telling the story without needing to immerse the viewer through such cheap tricks. Another thing that I can't stand is the lazy writing that authors do by trying to be postmodern and having women and children be more effective in combat than men. They come up with weak plot devices, like saying that the female brain works better than the male brain in certain capacities integral to the plot, and likewise the young mind. But what they have found is that the brain doesn't stop developing throughout a person's life except through atrophy and routines. So the premise of Ender's Game is already weakened by its very nature. The film just ends up feeling like a mix of Harry Potter and Starship Troopers. And in the lamest plot point, Ender's strategy that wins his battle against Bonzo's team in school is the same strategy that beats the graduation simulation. But in a fairly foreseeable turn of events, the graduation simulation isn't a simulation at all. So these generals put their final strike against the bug homeworld in the hands of a bunch of voice-cracking adolescents? Do I have to point out again how stupid a premise this is? And of course, Ender, not wanting to be like his brother Peter, doesn't like the fact that he killed all of the bugs. Ender gets knocked out because he's spazzing out, for lack of a better word, and when he wakes up he figures out that his dream/game world was the bugs trying to communicate with him. So he runs out onto the surface of the planet to a nearby ruin, and finds one of the bugs is still alive with a baby queen. We see Valentine playing with a mobile of the bug ships and their fighters. Why would anyone make a mobile of these things? Having been awarded the rank of Admiral from the rank of Commander for some reason, Ender sets out in a shuttle with the egg to find a new home for the baby. But then, for a really stupid final scene, they have him open his eyes while he's supposed to be in hypersleep. It would have been just as dramatic to see him lying there in hypersleep and then cut to black, rather than have him open his eyes for no real reason. That was just pointless and dumb, done for no reason. Writer and director Gavin Hood should feel ashamed for using that cheap device. I also find it ironic that the author of the novel, Orson Scott Card, is a staunch conservative, and yet this film seems to showcase importance of peace rather than war, and embracing people of all kinds rather than excluding them. I know that the story is a little bit against itself in its elements of leadership. Bonzo is a bad leader because he uses threats and intimidation to make people obey, while Ender is a person of vision who is placed in a position of authority. That doesn't seem all that different from Bonzo, really. I have to question this part of the story because it's a fascist wet dream. Leaders that just want power are bad, but leaders who listen and defer to others even though they know what's best for everyone. I think that it's the combination of this everyone listen to me self-important concept combined with the idea that he has to go do things alone and that he has a destiny, while although it's romantic, it is also the same thing that most young people feel in their teens. It was that feeling that led fascisms to rise, as young men became frustrated by the lack of empowerment that the world gave them. They couldn't be a singularity, but had to be a cog in a machine, replaceable and useful until used up. It's romantic to see things from the perspective of Orson Scott Card or Ayn Rand, that the individual against the sublime, but this isn't post-war Europe, where people were stunned, trying to survive, and trying to make the best of things, based on situations they know. And some guy with some appealing ideas and backing from wealthy elites can take over, and yes, that is how dictators rise to power. Now, and on into the future, we will live in a world where everyone has more than a few ideas on the way the world should work from their experience of things. We live in a global forum. What does this have to do with the world of Ender's Game? There are too many thinkers and followers among his colleagues, and it's all too convenient that things work out so that his academic idea works perfectly in the final battle. Like a lot of fiction from younger authors, usually male ones, the protagonist has the right ideas and everyone just needs to listen. Society doesn't work where everyone snaps to attention because you're important. I think that one of the problems with this story is that the kids haven't run drills to work out strategies, and Ender improvises strategies in the moment that succeed because he's just so smart. We don't see how he supposedly understands the enemy better than themselves, and all we really see is the self-conflict, when he regrets hurting or killing another living being. Ender is supposed to be a paragon for most adolescents and a messianic figure, but it's just a weak push to go to the lengths that he intuits just how to make it work. As I heard the dialogue about how in zero gravity, among someone being horizontal is relative to your perspective, I could see how to an adolescent the importance of having bearings in space could help them rationalize up versus down. But really the whole thing aches of two-dimensional thinking that is an allusion to the Wrath of Khan. His rationale isn't that of a brilliant strategist so much as a lateral or creative thinker, which isn't anything new, and the grown-ups just stand there and watch the kids do what they couldn't for some reason. Again, I question all this. For instance, why were there crew aboard the ships in the fleet if the whole thing was being commanded by the kids from light years away? How were the kids able to command the ships in real time, for that matter, given that distance? I can understand not telling the kids that the battle was really happening, but why leave the dreadnoughts and carriers behind, oh brilliant strategist Ender? Because I'm pretty sure that those could have drawn a lot of fire and taken a lot of the damage. And what's more, spoiler, if Ender really thought that it was wrong to take a life, then why fire on the planet to kill the queen bugs, if you feel that the life was so precious? I know he was pressured into attacking, as we try to make it like he always has been, but that doesn't excuse the fact that he decides to make the most lethal blows. It's obvious that Ender has studied Tai Chi, and yet he hasn't taken in the lesson that Tai Chi is used to make an attacker stop attacking, not to destroy the enemy. And yes, I'm back on the topic of Zen by discussing Tai Chi. The image of shielding his killing strike in battle for a single penetrative thrust has so much phallic Freudian imagery that I won't even try to dissect it more than I just have. But the majority of his strategies focus around a single individual or a single decisive blow taking out the opponent, rather than redirecting the opponent's energies back upon them. Again, this image conjures up some phallic associations. So surprise, Ender's a sexually curious and frustrated teenager, and he sounds like Edward Furlong in Terminator 2. The story is tired and dried out. We've seen it before again and again, from Star Wars A New Hope to many other franchises. I don't think that, in contrast to films like The Glass Compass, that we needed Orson Scott Card's opus adapted for the screen. It's only been adapted because they need film series with cult followings so they can sell the DVDs, books, games, and memorabilia. It's making movies for the sake of selling movies, not for the sake of making a good movie. This film offers little enjoyment and an unsatisfying resolution to just make sequel fodder out of the viewers. I deserve better, and so do you. What's more, there's little to appreciate in rewatching the film, as the whole thing is pretty simplistic. Harrison Ford gave a good performance, as does Sir Ben Kingsley and other adult actors, but the protagonist and confidants lack compelling performances beyond just being either innocent, enthusiastic, or mean. They're all kind of one-dimensional characters, and it shows in the dialogue, the more of it you watch. Ender's Game gets a 2 out of 5.